for a safe space where healing might take place, where everyone is valued. Given tools to maintain where equity matters. Less talk, more action, where anyone is welcome. Don't send them home packing, this is strong talk. When conversation pops off, speak life, reflect hope, promote choice and love folk. Strong talk, real talk, no jokes. Recovery, culture, community. Let's go.
Hello and welcome to Strong Talk, a podcast dedicated to the discussion of equity, diversity, and family as it relates to mental health and addictions. A space not only to talk about challenges, but to explore and create space for solutions. I'm your host, Vic Armstrong. I want to thank you all for joining me on this journey. I'm joined today by Douglas Reed, Executive Consultant, the Black Excellence Festival. Doug, good to have you with me today.
Always a pleasure, Vic. Appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, I know you are a very, very busy man, and I know, like most of the listeners, I'm just anxious to hear more about the Black Excellence Festival, but also the work you've been doing in general around empowering Black men to talk about mental health challenges and creating space to really think differently about what strength means, what it means to be vulnerable. Just so many different things we could touch on, but tell me a little bit about this festival. Tell me about the genesis of this festival, and then what it is that you're trying to accomplish through this Black Excellence Festival.
Yeah, the festival actually June 16th through the 18th in Atlantic City, New Jersey, bringing festival, from comedy shows to parties, and also we're having a Men of Color panel. One of the things that happens is the fact that based on my prior experience with, working as far as, empowering Black men, I was brought on this task to help bring in Black men and Black families. One of the things that, the beauty of the Atlantic City is the simple fact that back in the day, it was actually known as the Chicken Bone Beach, where you have Martin Luther King, Sammy Davis Jr., all those individuals were coming down there. So kind of bringing that back to Atlantic City, and of course their empowerment, where we bring in families. They have the arcade on the Showboat Hotel there. And so it's really about empowering, just like we're talking about the mental health. We got mental health and wellness panels. We got Malik Yoba. We got some stars that are actually going to be in there. So it's along those lines. And of course, when we talk and going further about empowering not only Black men, but the Black families.
Yeah. What is it about empowering Black families and Black men in particular? What is it about it that makes it challenging to the point where we're seeing more and more space created just for this conversation, that it doesn't always come up organically. It doesn't come up in other settings. What is it that's unique about this conversation with Black men?
Well, one, because I have to revert back to myself. I have never been very vulnerable to receive anything from, let's say, another Black man, or even within our community. So I think about all my trials and tribulations throughout life, and some of the disparities that we're faced with in our communities, being marginalized. I think my experiences, and then I found out I had a voice, actually empowered me to be vulnerable, share my feelings, share some of the things that I was going through, to actually be an example and show other Black men and families that, we could walk this process out, but we can do it together.
Yeah, when you talk about some of the things that we face growing up as Black men, I mean, it obviously resonates with me growing up. Not only growing up as a Black man, but growing up as a Black man in the rural South. That there are a lot of things that are unique to the Black experience, and I find that one of the challenges, and I'd be interested in your thoughts on this. That one of the challenges also that we face, I think, is that when Black men do go into mental health treatment settings, oftentimes what I hear Black men saying is that the conversation, the treatment modalities don't speak to the experience of a Black man. It is much more of a generic conversation that pinpoints certain things that you may say, certain things that you may do, and then categorizes those things to give you a diagnosis. But unless it takes into account the experiences of structural exclusion, of systemic racism, and things that Black men have experienced, those experiences, as a Black man talks about them, can often sound like paranoia or some other some other negative thing, as opposed to, this is just my experience as a Black man in America. Have you found that to be true?
Yeah, and a lot of that comes from the being safe and secure, being in an environment to be safe, and then being able to open up about some of the experiences that we go through.
Yeah.
Even like I worked in the prison for 20 years, 25 years.
Yeah.
That was at the height of mass incarceration.
Yeah.
But everything that was going on in our communities, being the police brutality. So us actually seeing this and then trying to come in an environment to express ourselves from things that we didn't see, we didn't trust the system.
Yeah.
Then if we don't trust the system, then it's going to be very difficult for us to share our thoughts, our feelings on how the system works, because we've seen so many different disparities in it where we don't trust it. And now we're getting to a point, as going forward, this podcast, we're getting to a point now we're using our voice and letting other Black men, see that, we can get them to a place where they feel safe and then express their thoughts.
And when you talk about feeling safe and creating those safe spaces, what's the difference in a space that's safe versus a space that is, like I hear people talk all the time about courageous conversations, bold spaces. But to me, there's a difference in a bold space and a safe space, because to me, being bold sometimes can lead to bad consequences for Black and brown communities. Speaking boldly can lead to bad consequences for Black and brown communities. So how do you create that safe space where you're not just asking people to be vulnerable and risk harm, but you are telling them it is safe to be who you are in this space and to share in this space, and maybe even using the Black Excellence Festival as an example. How do you create a safe environment in that space?
Well, one is being transparent, being able to express my thoughts, my feelings, the things that I'm vulnerable, my experiences that led to, I've been divorced a couple of times. I've been bankrupt financially. I've been faced racism. So all those things to express. Now, when you get men, and I have to bring up Black Men Heal. Black Men Heals gives the free therapy to Black men, 8 free sessions. And we did a thing called King's Corner that we were doing virtually every Sunday at 7 p.m. Still going on. And then one of the things that we did was called a King's Corner tour. And we were able to get Black men to come into this tour only because of what they heard virtually. But then they trusted us. They trusted us as individuals. And it's very hard to get, there's that thing of that strength. When you start talking about removing the stigma around certain things, then we talk about mental health. Now we're talking about something that we never talked about even at our dinner tables. We never talked about, I'm pretty sure you played sports in high school. We talked about mentality. We talked about being mentally tough.
Yeah.
Never talked about mental health. We never talk about mental health awareness. We never talk about some of the things within our families that, let's say somebody was bipolar or going through something, the family, the community, everybody said they were just crazy.
Yeah.
Those are what are things that, define mental health. We had to define mental health, back in those days.
Yeah.
I was just being crazy.
Yeah. And, to that point too, Black men don't really have the language a lot of times to talk about vulnerability. We just have not been socialized that way to be able to talk about what it means to feel scared or lonely or to feel vulnerable. And even now when Black men talk about that it's okay to be vulnerable. I'm not sure oftentimes that we are all saying the same things, about what that means, speaking the same language, but what that means to be vulnerable. So how do you have thoughts on what outside of a setting like a Black Excellence Festival, whether we're talking about, the home space, the workspace, um, do you have thoughts on what people can do to help men of color and Black men in particular to feel like it's more of a safe space to be vulnerable, to be themselves?
I think you just raised a great point when we talk about vulnerability, because when you talk vulnerability, first first thing that I've heard gentlemen say, they associate with vulnerability as far as being gay or being weak, something like that. So, but when you start about being vulnerable, one of the things a very close friend of mine, Dr. Alfie, she actually made a statement that your feelings are valid in our relationships. Like, no matter, they may be inadequate or sometimes we're a little off, but our feelings matter because that's what I'm expressing. So being vulnerable means able to express your feelings and not having that be so judgmental.
Yeah.
Then trusting that space to actually be able to talk more. I mean, people like yourself, Vic, you think about the work that you've done as a social worker, having that ability, and we talked about it, even going forward with the church conversation, but
Right.
having that ability to find a trusted individual, especially within a Black man, to express your feelings, not being judged,
Yeah.
not putting stigma on you, but being able to really want to have a heart-to-heart conversation on how you feel.
Yeah.
Not to be criticized, to be weak or anything like that, but trying to get you a place where it's all about your mental health, all about the awareness, and all about that healing of some of those traumas.
Yeah.
What I've discovered, and I'm not I'm not a therapist, but in my conversations with men, a lot of their issues happen when they were in their childhood.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that too, because we both have done work with the Black church. And we focus in large part on the Black church because the Black church has traditionally been the gateway to the Black community. But one of the things I have found in working with the Black church is that one of the challenges oftentimes is that faith leaders have not dealt with their own trauma, oftentimes going back to childhood. And that, sometimes could be an impediment to them allowing you to come in and do things in the church in that faith-based space, even to provide healing to especially to other men. One other thing too, I know you mentioned it briefly a few minutes ago, but you also were affiliated with Black Men Heal. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that. I will say this about Black Men Heal. I have a couple of Black Men Heal t-shirts, and I wear one every once in a while, and it is amazing the kind of response you get. That just really reinforces to me that there are a lot of brothers out here who are hurting, because I'll get questions like, what does that mean? What is there something local? How can I find out more about that? Because just when you talk about healing for Black men are hurting in so many areas that just the idea of healing is appealing.
Yeah, I was actually the director of partnerships with Black Men Heal. Also did some of their marketing. Actually, I was the one that actually sent all the t-shirts out. So that was me getting the orders out to you. So Black Men Heal actually concentrates on removing that stigma around mental illness or mental health, and then removing the financial barrier around costs. Because they give 8 free sessions, and they're actually doing it in 8 different states, and expanding, especially with everything that's going on with the compact agreements, hoping to even go further, because now we're the therapists are able to practice in other states. But the thing about it, what I learned, because I became like a face for Black Men Heal, that there was an experience, because you said it. I didn't even realize for myself how many men were hurting And one of the bold statements is Black men heal. That's taking a broad approach to it. That's taking, like you mentioned before, that's taking a bold approach. For the simple fact that, you know, I know we're only short on time, but you're talking about the imposter syndrome. You're talking about so many different things. So when people see, and along with myself, when they see something, they say Black men heal, based on everything that we saw, George Floyd, when we seen George Floyd murdered, that was a real big wake-up call for us. And seeing it and then able to express our feeling, because we were all hurt. So that organization provides the free therapy to Black men in eight different states, and with, you know, eliminating the cost barrier by doing it for free.
Yeah. So in your experience, as you have really leaned heavily into this space around mental well-being and mental wellness for Black men, do you feel like we're making strides in the right direction?
I do. And just like we made in our conversations, like I make a vow to do more. Because, you know, with everything that's going on, you know, we talked about it, like, you know, I think about, you know, the Black churches, because I think about generations and generations and generations before us that pray for us for this moment. And we have to do our part. And we're doing that part. And I think the more we talk about it, I'm a mental health advocate, so I'll talk more about mental health awareness, you know, the 8 dimensions of wellness. So long as we continue to have these conversations, corporate America taking an approach to fund organizations to get that word out, you know, provide mental health first aid, and continue just for us to do everything collectively. I think, yes, I definitely think we're on the right track.
Yeah, I think it's great. We're seeing more musicians, more athletes come out and talk about mental health challenges. So I definitely think we're moving in the right direction. You know, what I would love to see more of, though, is there are so many moving parts to this mental health space, and we're doing some amazing things right now with the rollout of 988 last July, and states are still expanding Medicaid. Here in North Carolina, we just got approved to expand Medicaid, but there's still so much work to be done to make sure that as we are, whether we're rolling out 988 or expanding Medicaid, that we're including the voice of Black and Brown communities in how that looks and how that rolls out and how that shapes out, because creating more of traditional resources is very different from speaking to the intersectionality of being a Black man with mental health challenges. I say all the time that it's very different for a 65-year-old white male who's having a mental health crisis versus a 35-year-old Black male. The response is going to be different, the access to resources is going to be different. And we still have a lot of work to do on closing those kind of gaps. But I'm glad to see that we're creating space to have these conversations. I do want to get your thought on one other thing, though. It's kind of the pros and cons. I think it's great that we're having these spaces. There's always having these conversations, you know, in these spaces. There's always a part of me, though, that has a little bit of fear that we have a limited pot of resources, limited pot of funding, and when we're having these conversations and really taking it upon ourselves in our communities to try to craft resources and access for Black and Brown communities, we may oftentimes end up competing for resources that would be going to other organizations, and I'm just always a little bit leery of that. So I'm always hopeful that we can have a larger umbrella in our traditional organizations, but also I'm hopeful that as we have organizations like the Black Excellence Festival or like Black Men Heal and like Dr. Alfie's project that you mentioned a few minutes ago, that we are collaborating with one another, working with one another, sharing resources, because I think that our resources are already limited. And so I would love to see us come together to work more strongly together. Black Excellence Festival may be a good venue to do just that.
Yes, definitely. And I even think about it, let's say if we get into the politics of it, it's a bipartisan issue.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, doesn't matter what side of the political fence you're on. We're talking about healing. We're talking about marginalized communities getting access to
Yeah.
heal, to break those barriers financially, even with our education system. So many of those barriers that are created because of lack of funding. So, yes, I think a collective effort would actually be great as we move forward.
Well, we're about to wrap up now. Time flies when we're having these conversations, but anything that we might have missed, is there anything that you want us to know about the Black Excellence Festival that's coming up? How people can get access if they want to attend the Black Excellence Festival? Anything else you'd like to share?
Yeah, definitely about the Black Excellence Festival. Available on all social media streams under the Black Excellence Festival. To be held June 16th, June 18th in Atlantic City, which is the Father's Day Juneteenth weekend. So a lot of purpose behind that. And me personally, I'll be doing a men's conference in the spring of 2024, highlighting some of the things based on my lived experience as a mental health advocate, work which around mental health, around prison reform, and around military, African-American military veterans who face disparity around disability benefits.
Fantastic. Well, Doug, thank you so much for being with me today. And as always, to our listeners, to our viewers, thank you for joining us today on Strong Talk. And until next time, this has been Strong Talk. Clearly, mental health conditions do not discriminate based on race, color, or gender identity. Yet, we see stark differences in access to and utilization of treatment resources. Approximately 1 in 5 adults in the U.S. experience mental illness each year, regardless of their race. Less than half of adults in the U.S. with a mental health condition receive mental health services each year. Black Americans, however, utilize mental health services at about 1/2 the rate of white Americans. This begs the question as to why. There is an anecdotal belief that Black men do not want therapy or mental health counseling. I say this is categorically false. What Black men want is the same thing everyone else wants: access to treatment that speaks to who I am as a Black man in America, access to treatment that acknowledges the unique challenges of being Black in America. Interventions should validate and empower the client, normalize their feelings, and empathize with the unique struggles they face regarding racism and discrimination. We cannot rule out the impact of historical adversity, which has led to race-based exclusion from health, educational, social, and economic resources. Many Black Americans today still feel the socioeconomic impact of slavery, sharecropping, and Jim Crowism. Socioeconomic status is linked to mental health, and that people who are impoverished, homeless, or incarcerated are at risk for poor mental health. We cannot ignore the impact of structural exclusion and systemic racism and social injustice, even in our mental health system today. Harsh words to hear, even harsher realities to live. Realities that have created a world in which Black men often feel like society does not value our lives, let alone our thoughts and feelings. When patients are provided with culturally and linguistically appropriate information, they're empowered to create healthier outcomes for themselves and their communities. And when they are engaged in the visualization and formation of treatment resources, when they are at the table as trusted partners and messengers, creating resources reflective of their lived experience, they're empowered to create healthier outcomes for everyone. And that is Strong Talk.
What's the word? What's the word? Word, strong talk, strong talk. What's the word? What's the word? What's the word? Yeah. What's the word? Strong talk, strong talk.